Good morning, Pinsar basketball community. I realize due to the impromptu nature of this live at 5:44, there will be hardly anyone who's going to watch this live, but to those of you who do, I've got some stuff to say. I have spent nearly an entire day absorbing just about everything that has been said about Nick Nurse, from the Athletic podcast, which I highly recommend that you go watch, to the Toronto media's coverage of it. And if you've been a fan of this channel, you know that I've very often taken a very hard stance against Toronto media for good reason. I'm going to show you a clip from Bob McCowan. Now, please understand that Bob is somebody who knows a lot about basketball, has covered, the Toronto Raptors, knows a lot of people in the NBA. So this is somebody that I'm not just picking on a random YouTuber. This is someone with a real platform who has some serious credibility. And, let's just listen to
I
this.
think that, and I think the next day Masai was on the phone saying, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And I think they probably had a pretty candid conversation about, well, I'm reading about Udoku coming to be my replacement. What's going on here? And I think that day, I think that cemented Nick Nurse was going to be dismissed as the coach of the Toronto Raptors.
Okay, so the entire implication here is that Masai Ujiri had created some sort of master plan to bring Ime Udoka in regardless, and Nick Nurse caught wind of it due to Doug Smith, who, these two just swear by Doug Smith. They even said, I swear to God, they said, God bless Doug Smith in this video here earlier. And the implication here is that Nick Nurse was simply sort of sticking up for himself, just a bit of a casualty. They
You think the
continue.
general manager had made that decision already?
I think the president of basketball operations,
Or the
Masai
president?
Ujiri,
Yeah.
I think he was leaning that way, and I think that was the tipping point. I think that put him over the top. And you know, when you hear Masai talk in his press conference on Friday, that he says, the decision was made after the play-in game against the Bulls, where they were up 19 and then ended up losing.
That's not what he said.
And he hated to lose, and it was a bad season. I don't blame him. You and I've talked about what's right with this team, what's wrong with this team. But I think by doing what he did to Nurse, he is putting all the blame for the failure of this team on Nick Nurse, and he's not taking any responsibility himself.
This is so inaccurate, so false, and I don't want to be the person, who tells you this. But I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to. Because unfortunately, this is, it's been a long-standing obsession of mine to figure out how information travels among sports fans, right? Someone says something, someone repeats it. Most of us are pretty brain dead when it comes to critical evaluation and thinking for ourselves. This is not offense to anybody. It's just a society we live in. We live in a copycat society. Someone said it, so it must be true. It's on the internet, and so we go with it. We travel with it. It just continues to go on and on. Now, these two continue on.
Change then Nick had to go.
I take it that one of the issues, I wouldn't say the only issue, but one of the issues with Nurse was the fact that he did not play his bench. He did not go very deep. He had a reluctance to play a bunch of players who weren't starters.
Nick Nurse's problem?
No, I don't think so. Scottie Barnes had plenty of opportunity. He had opportunity
Correct.
every night.
Correct.
And I think he was below average, to tell you the truth. I know you don't agree with me.
No,
And
no,
the basketball guys generally don't either, but
I think he was
Barnes
distracted.
Was a big disappointment.
I think Barnes was distracted all season long. I think he was distracted. I think that he had too much too soon. All the outside influences of the game. I mean, and you might think I'm silly, but this kid's 21 years old. He's being bombarded with everything, whether it being, and Masai talked about this in the press conference, saying he didn't even want to go to the NBA championship, the NBA finals, to pick up his Rookie of the Year trophy.
All right. Enough of these two numbskulls. Let me just clarify something for you. I have listened to the Toronto media botch story after story. This is getting irresponsible as hell. Okay? You have a platform. Just because you're on the internet doesn't mean you just get to lie. Okay? Scottie Barnes finals engagement was not to pick up his trophy. It was, in fact, to cover the finals as a media correspondent. And to those of you who remember, he showed up. He did a great job. He met up with Steph Curry. He met up with Grant Williams, made some friends, but maybe he didn't want to do that. And, that's kind of funny because everything that you hear from the Toronto media is that, oh, this guy's in this commercial and that commercial. And if I had let these two numbskulls continue, they would have gone on to say, oh, I turned on my TV and I saw him in 4 commercials. It's just not right. It's not right for somebody. Oh my God. These people must not know about Kobe's rap album. These people must not know about anything. Look, I want to talk about this very candidly, and I wanted to use this as an introduction. These two are not the only people in the Toronto media space who talked about this today. Michael Grange, of course, talked about it. And there seems to be a bit of a recurring theme. Most people seem to fall into 2 camps. Number one, they fall into the camp that Masai Ujiri and Nick Nurse had fundamental disagreements about how to use the roster, the lack of development with the young players. Okay, so it was a creative difference, and that Nurse kind of wanted to be out anyways. Okay, that's one camp. Camp number 2 is pretty much that, the roster was flawed. They didn't have a center. They didn't have shooting, and therefore Nurse is basically a casualty because Masai Ujiri basically needs a scapegoat because he didn't do his job this year. That's camp number 2. Sorry to tell you, both camps are wrong. Okay, this is not factual. This is not what I've heard, and I'm not trying to say that I'm more plugged in than Michael Grange or anything like that, but maybe I am willing to be a little bit more honest about this. Okay, the Raptors this year, if you can read between the lines of what Masai Ujiri was saying, we were not us this year. He's not just talking about playing the bench. They didn't play the bench last year either, by the way. Nick Nurse did not get fired last year. They overperformed last year. If you consider this year underperforming, do you think that this was simply about wins and losses? It was not. What happened this year for the Toronto Raptors was a complete shift. Talk to any person who covers this team. Talk to any person who has been in those locker rooms. There was a divide in this team, and it did not start with the players only. It was between the coaches as well. I told you 2-3 weeks ago that when he's fired, things will come out about him and the environment that he allowed to happen in his locker room, his relationship with his assistant coaches, his relationship with his players, some of the things that he did. I don't want to say it. How do I get around this? Okay. There was an instance with Earl Watson. Okay. Where okay, let me not implicate Earl Watson in this case. There was a situation in which an assistant coach was sent home. This was Raps Muse tweet today, in which an assistant coach was sent home, and it was without Masai Ujiri's consent, and that it had to be smoothed over, and there was like tension between the assistant coach and the coach the entire year. There was a clear divide between the coaching staff, how much coaching staff had access to players. There was a serious paranoia in the Raptors locker room. There were instances where guys who just a year ago, so just to clear this up, were guys who were willing to work hours after practice, or 45 minutes, they were willing to stay an hour, and suddenly this year, they're out. They're in the gym, they're out the gym, they don't want to be there. So what happened? It's just contracts? Well, Masai Ujiri squashed that pretty quickly, right? He said, look, these guys know we took care of Kyle, we took care of OG when his contract came up, we took care of Gary the last time his contract came up. These guys know that we take care of, the guys. So it wasn't just the contracts. No, there was a genuine tension. Now, if you talk to people who cover the NBA outside of Toronto, we're talking people in Boston, people in Houston, people in New York, people that I've heard from. They've said that on the road, this team felt very weird. It could explain their road record as well. It felt very disjointed, not like most teams that came in. There were rumors. I don't want to say substantiated rumors because I cannot confirm this because I did not watch it myself. There were rumors that there were assistant coaches who were openly expressing that they would not have jobs at the end of this year, and they might be looking for opportunities. Do you have any opportunities? Okay. something that I heard. The writing was on the wall that Nick Nurse would be gone sometime around January. This became an open secret in the NBA, one of the biggest open secrets, that he would not be coming back. This entire issue of he's a good guy, he's this wonderful coach who did this and that, he has built a cult. He has built a cult following. And honestly, it is a little bit silly to suggest that because he won a championship, that he should get a lifetime pass for every decision he's made since. He's made a ton of bad decisions. His ATOs have not been great. His coaches' challenges have been atrocious. His management of the roster has not been great. There seems to be a standing belief among this fan base, and I would argue so against it, that there isn't shooting on this roster. There's no shooters. How can you win with no three-point shooters? It's Masai's fault. He didn't give him any three-point shooters. Need I remind you that Joe Wieskamp shot 46% at Iowa in his last year? Need I remind you that Ron Harper Jr., who was barely ever used on this roster, shot 40% at Rutgers? These guys are shooters. Did they just forget how to shoot? Otto was a shooter. OG's a shooter. It wasn't an issue of shooting on this roster. You didn't have players who could shoot. You had a lack of spacing. You had a lack of offensive scheme. You had a lack of offensive creativity. You had a two guys do whatever the hell they want with the ball type of offense, and those guys, neither of which are very gifted creators. You had two guys who were not held to a standard by this coach that other guys were. You had guys who in a contract year were put to the bench and called out publicly by this coach. He was asking to be fired. If you want my honest opinion, he was asking to be fired. He dared them to fire him, and they did. He had his eyes on other jobs. There's a rumor that when the Raptors were in Houston, he did not fly back with the team. What was that about? This entire notion that, when the Doug Smith article came out, that suddenly, he became immediately paranoid, that, hey, you guys are going to replace me with Ime Udoka. I'm just going to, clear the air, whatever. What did he even do in that situation? They were just an extension of his gaslighting at this point, acting like he's the victim of all of this, that Masai Ujiri just was going to fire him no matter what, because he needs someone to hold the bag. Masai Ujiri has numerous times claimed that maybe it's him. He needs to do a better job. He needs to win. He hasn't deflected all of the blame onto Nick Nurse as they would have you suggest. Of course, Nick Nurse has friends in the Toronto media space. A lot of the stories that have come out this year have been very Nurse-centric. They have been from his point of view. The entire talking point this entire year is that the bench is the problem. Need I remind you that prior to the Jakob Poeltl trade and prior to OG Anunoby coming back from injury, the Raptors found a way to start Precious Achiuwa and Gary Trent Jr., and both players were doing pretty okay. Those so-called, good starters who were doing this against starters suddenly became part of a non-existent bench. How do you justify that? How do you explain that? It's not that the Raptors don't have talent. It's not that this roster is fundamentally flawed. It is a coaching staff and their responsibility to put players in a position to succeed. And this coaching staff, led by Nick Nurse, over and over again, did not do that. You saw players act completely out of character this year, do things, say things that maybe just did not reflect who they have been for their entire careers up until that point. I saw a joyless Scottie Barnes for the first time in my life. I have watched him play since he was 16 years old. I have been following him. I've seen tape of him when he was 14. I've never seen him act like this. And all year I saw this guy take the brunt of criticism for his lack of development. And now I am listening to this same media that claimed that, he didn't work hard last offseason and he didn't do this and he didn't do that. Claim that there's just too many distractions. He's doing too many ads. He wants the exposure. He wants the limelight. He's being pulled in all these directions. That is not what Masai Ujiri said. Masai Ujiri said that he is 21 years old. He's a baby, and that ultimately, he's being pulled in a lot of different directions. Correct. He might be being pulled in a lot of different directions. But maybe, just maybe, it would really help if your 21-year-old future superstar, ascending star, had a coach that he could talk to, a coach that he trusted, a coach that held the star players on the team to the same standard that he held his 12th man, 11th man, and G Leaguers. Maybe having a coach who refuses to coach two players on the roster, refuses to hold them accountable, creates a toxic work environment. Consider it, because it's a very strong consideration. Because I'll tell you right now, I don't judge people for how they act in toxic environments. I don't. I don't believe that if you go into work tomorrow and your boss basically infringes on all your boundaries, breaks promises to you, says they're going to do one thing, does something completely different, says your role is going to be this, and then breaks his word, doesn't communicate it to you, doesn't tell you, hey, by the way, your role is going to change here. Talk to any coach. This is one of the most fundamental elements of being a head coach. It's not the X's and O's. You have assistants for that. It's not development. You have player development staff for that. It is the communication between coach and player, the trust that must be established, the accountability factor, the clarity of focus. This is your role. This is what I need. This is what I need from you. And then the activation of that player and the trust the player must have in the coach that this person is setting me up to succeed, that I don't need to be distracted about all the other things. I don't need to take my development into my own hands. I'm in good hands with this person. That trust should never be fractured. And when that trust is fractured, I do not hold that person accountable for looking in different directions for guidance. I do not hold that person accountable for maybe sulking a little bit. I don't hold that person accountable for maybe, dipping out of practice a little bit early. I don't, because that person has been placed in an environment that is not suitable, not optimal, and not healthy. Okay? There are a lot of great players in this league who have had their entire careers derailed because they had really bad coaches. I'm very happy to say that Scottie Barnes will not have a bad coach next year. I have an inkling that the Raptors will prioritize communication, accountability, honesty, and trust in their next coaching candidate. At some point today or tomorrow, I will do a live covering the 13 coaching candidates that the Raptors could be looking at, including 4 serious ones, including 2 kind of funny ones, and including some maybe out-of-the-box ideas that some people are not going to report on and talk about, but I know that the Raptors have considered these guys for sure. I just want to say that I think that the front office is not perfect. You can certainly look at their 6-9 experiment, Vision 6-9, and say it's a flaw. It's not flawed. There are plenty of teams in this league that are doing something very similar and achieving great success. It is not a novel idea the Raptors just had, and they're not the first team to think about it. The Boston Celtics, the Golden State Warriors, with their death lineup, all of these things could be very much considered a Vision 6-9 or pseudo-hybrid of what the Raptors were attempting here. I think Nick Nurse understands basketball, but it is after 5 years of watching him and 3 years of receiving disturbing stories about him from people who've dealt with him, from people who've met him, from people who've been coached by him, from people who've worked with him, that I am very firm in saying that I do not believe that I don't think that I would be happy working for someone like this. That is the impression that I got. I do not believe that I would have an easy time communicating with someone like this. I do not believe that I would have an easy time trusting someone like this. As a bit of a bleeding heart empath, I do have a great deal of empathy for people when they are in situations that I myself can identify with. And I think most of us can identify with having a boss that we don't trust, having a boss that may or may not have our best interest at heart. And I don't think that we should be held accountable necessarily. I'm not saying we are blameless if we start showing up late for work, start slacking off, start missing deadlines. I don't think you're blameless in this situation if you start slacking. I don't think you're blameless, but I definitely don't think that the brunt of the responsibility comes on you. I think the brunt of the responsibility was on Masai Ujiri to make a change. I'm very happy he made one. To the media out there, please report the facts. That's all I'm asking. That's all I've ever asked from you. I'm not asking you to be sleuths. I'm not asking you to be the next Woj or the next Shams and come out with the breaking stories. I'm just asking you, you have access to these players. Talk to the ones you know. Get the actual story about what the environment was like. And if you've been around this team this year at all, if you know any of the players or any of the training staff or any of the assistant coaches, you certainly know that this was not an optimal environment to be judging a 20 or a 21-year-old for their work ethic. Okay? I don't believe that, suddenly Delano Banton is at fault for his lack of development. I don't think, there have been so many players and people around those players, from their parents to their friends, who have just openly questioned how their friend or son or whoever was being used in this offense. Openly questioned, the fit. Openly questioned the ethos. The Raptors were not themselves this year. I would definitely agree with that. This is not a team that ever felt together. So the question is, whose responsibility was it to pull them together? Nick Nurse gets a lot of credit for being the winningest coach in franchise history. He has won more playoff games than any coach prior to. Need I remind you of the coaches that he preceded? How many Hall of Fame coaches are there in the rear view that had the same number of years to achieve this as he did? And how many of those coaches had a Kawhi Leonard, the greatest player in Raptor history, and Kyle Lowry, still a serviceable Kyle Lowry? How many coaches have been afforded the type of roster? Do you know the Raptors went into luxury tax once? Once. In franchise history. They've only gone into luxury tax once. And it was in Nick Nurse's first year as a head coach. His winningest year. Correlation is not causation, but man, there's some strong correlation between, making a trade for Marc Gasol and suddenly your defense goes up, right? There's certainly a correlation between having one of the greatest playoff performers of all time in Kawhi Leonard, 2 times Finals MVP now, who has, by the way, had a better year statistically the very next year with the LA Clippers. He had a better year statistically, just didn't have the same team around him, didn't have the same luck. What did you do? Box and 1 on Steph Curry. Forever and ever known as the coach who pulled out a high school tactic against an NBA champion. It's a novelty. It's clickbait. It's clickbait. Nick Nurse understands basketball. I do not think, based on everything I have seen and everything I've heard over the last 5 years, that Nick Nurse understands people. I wish I could say I wish him luck at his next spot. But for what he did this year, for how he did it, for all of my complaints with Jay Triano, I don't think he ever did this. All my complaints with Nick Nurse, with Dwayne Casey's lack of offensive, the only time I've ever felt the way I feel about Nick Nurse, about another coach in Raptors history, was Sam Mitchell. And in both cases, I felt that both men were egomaniacs who put themselves above the team, alienated players, rubbed people the wrong way. Yeah, that's how I felt about Sam Mitchell. And to this day, I can never quite get over that period in Raptor history, what I watched, what I heard, what I witnessed happen on the court, off the court. And to this day, I don't believe that after Nick Nurse's tenure is over, and it's been such a messy thing, and I appreciate the Raptors trying to clean it up, saying that it was about the bench not playing enough and young players not developing. I want to ask you a question. Let's say you went to the doctor tomorrow and the doctor said, you say, I have a back pain. And you're like, great, you have a back pain. That's your problem. Let's solve the back. But you say like, okay, well, we solved the back pain, come back a week later, back still hurts. Okay, let's put some icy hot on it. But the issue is not the back. The issue is something much deeper inside of you. Maybe a tumor, a cancer, or something. But it's not the back. The back is a symptom. The back pain is a symptom. It is not the actual infliction. That is not the infection. That is not the disease. It is just a symptom. Young players developing is a symptom. It is not the root. Coaches the arrangement on the bench of how the players sat this year, the friction between the players. This is a symptom. This is a symptom of a team that lacks leadership. This is a symptom of a toxic work environment. The lack of bench, the trust, the lack of spacing, the lack of sharing the ball, making obvious plays for your teammates, the occasional press tours of these teams, OG Anunoby being unhappy with his role and then having nothing happen with it, Scottie Barnes looking joyless. These are all symptoms. These are not root causes. Scottie's not the problem. OG is not the problem. These are not the problems. They are simply casualties. They are casualties of a toxic workplace environment. To those of you out there, and there are several of you, there are maybe thousands and thousands of you who cannot distance yourself from the NBA championship. You cannot distance yourself from the idea that maybe the Raptors have made a terrible mistake. Maybe the Raptors should have looked at making a roster change before making a coaching change. Maybe, some of you are extreme, the Raptors should have fired the general manager or the president before firing this coach, the coach that won you the championship. I assure you, as things come out, as the narrative shifts, as the media, who are probably sitting on a lot of stories, by the way, it's impossible for me to know some of the stuff that I know and these people not know it. As the stories come out, especially once he gets his new job, if he gets a new job, he's going to need a reference for that job. I guarantee you within a year, you will not feel that way. You will not feel nostalgic. You will not feel we made a big mistake. And if the Raptors hire who I hope they hire, I think you'll forget about Nick Nurse pretty quickly. He won a championship with the Raptors. He did not win the Raptors a championship. Don't get it twisted. Okay? If it were up to him, the Raptors would have continued to play the Bucks the way they were playing them, and they would have probably gotten swept. Or they would have lost that series. You had players who were very smart players on that team, like Marc Gasol, like Kawhi Leonard, 2 former defensive players of the year, like Kyle Lowry, pretty much a guy who should have made first team or second team all NBA defense almost like every year of his prime. Guys like that who knew the opportunity in front of them and they were not going to let a first-year head coach screw that up. Okay? When we talk about race, the inequality of opportunities afforded to coaches, you think about a guy like Steve Nash. First coaching gig ever. Here's Kevin Durant. Here's Kyrie Irving. Go do something with it. Nick Nurse. Here's Kawhi Leonard, Marc Gasol, Kyle Lowry. Go do something with it. Steven Silas. Here's Alperen Şengün and, Jalen Green and, the corpse of Eric Gordon. Go do something with it. Everyone is not afforded the same opportunities in life. Some people are lucky. Sometimes it's just corrupt. But I will tell you that there are very few coaches that I can think of who could have coached that team. Good, professional, highly regarded coaches. Coaches like Frank Vogel. Coaches like Ime Udoka. Guys who belong on NBA benches as head bosses who could have screwed up a team that talented. The Raptors were one of the 3 teams, the year they won it, they were one of the 3 teams, per the numbers, that could have realistically won it. In very many years with Dwayne Casey, they were not one of those 3 teams. Could you argue that Dwayne Casey could have screwed it up? Sure, maybe, possibly. I doubt it, though. Okay? I doubt it. Regardless of how you feel about Dwayne Casey, and I've not been a huge fan of Dwayne Casey. Players developed. Never heard any sort of, players are unhappy, players at each other's throats, players are jumping for money. Nope. He kept it together, man. He kept it together. He kept it honest. Because with Coach Casey, the one thing you can never say is he never lied to you. He told you the truth. He told you to your face, okay, you're not going to play today. And he communicated it to you. He didn't tell you this is going to be your role, and then, 2 weeks later, your role just changes Mid-game, no communication for a week. Now you're looking around like, what, huh? Now you're by yourself. You're on an island. If rumors about him basically limiting access between his assistant coaches and his players are true, if this sort of infighting between, when all that stuff came out about Nate Bjorkgren and Nurse and Fred VanVleet were the two guys who came to his came to his defense, and all of these other players are like, nah, not messing with this guy. You knew where these guys stood. Okay. So I just want to say, for the record, if you're one of those fans who's a little bit worried that the Raptors have lost the greatest coach in franchise history, don't worry about it. I'm just putting it out there. Don't worry about it. Look, just like you, I was a big believer in Nick Nurse, read his book, believed all the bullshit. Someone sent me a text message 3 months ago. I changed my tune like that. 2 screenshots. That's what it took. And then suddenly all the rumors started to make sense. All the little murmurs, all the chatter, all of it that I had just ignored and rejected and said, no way, that's not true. He seems like a really nice guy. How could a guy who do this? It's an illusion. In my opinion, it's an illusion. Okay? You got 46 comments. I wonder what they say. All right. Thank you. I don't know. I got really worried when he was dancing. I was like, I don't know what this guy's gonna do. It's just. Sean, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. What are you doing up? It's crazy. Good morning, all. Bro, why 6 a.m.? Honestly, sometimes the greatest and most lucid thoughts come to us at the craziest hours. Yeah, I have a couple of ideas for videos I want to do over the next 2 days. Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to say this. I absorbed an entire day of Toronto media talking about this. Obviously, that's too much. It's too much. It's too much for my head to take all that misinformation all in all at once. But I do want to thank all 82 of you for staying up with me or getting up with me at 6:16 in the morning. Have a great day, guys. But yeah, I just wanted to put this thought out there that, after listening to an entire day of this, listening to Michael Grange and, Bob McCowan and all these people, I do not agree with the reporting on why Nick Nurse was let go. And I appreciate Masai Ujiri keeping it above the belt and not talking about the toxic workplace environment, not talking about infighting between the coaches, not talking about player dissatisfaction, trying not to scapegoat the players as saying like, hey, like the exit interviews were very depressing, hearing about, what had gone wrong with the communication and who had been coached and who hadn't been coached. But look, like, these are the same people reporting on, this is the issue. These are the same people telling you 3 months ago there were no issues. And I'm not trying to, create some sort of, don't trust the media, type of narrative, because I realize that every, that can get very toxic very quickly as well. But I am asking you to trust your eyes, trust your brain, and definitely listen to the athletic pod. The Athletic, fantastic website. The Athletic, very plugged in guys. They did a podcast yesterday in which they talked extensively about the Nick Nurse firing, and I think all gloves were off. Like they definitely went into some of the stuff that I'm talking about, not all of it. Trust me, there are people who are holding on to stories, and when the pile-on starts, if it doesn't start tomorrow or next week, and honestly, kudos to the Raptors, very smart move releasing this on a Friday, because if you'd release this on a Monday, that's 5 days of stories, and if you release this on a Friday, it's a really good way to squash the media cycle. They typically tend to say release bad news on a Friday in terms of a PR standpoint, so smart move from Nick Nurse, and maybe Nick Nurse is able to even get the job that he's looking for over the weekend, so that these news articles that are going to come out afterwards don't bury him. But good luck to the Rockets with Nick Nurse if he does end up getting that job. There are some rumblings that there will be some marquee free agents that will be looking at the Rockets next year. Great. personally, just not going to miss him. Really, really happy in this situation just for the players. I'm very happy for Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Scottie Barnes, and just that entire huddled group at the end of the bench that you saw all year that were just talking amongst each other, didn't always look engaged. There were so many times this year when the Raptors came out not ready. And when have you seen that? How often can you realistically say that the Raptors gave up 41 points in the first quarter? Think about that. 41 points. That's on pace for 164 points in the game. This is a team that tuned its head coach out. I think you need to start asking the right questions, which is why. And I don't believe the answer that they're just a bunch of spoiled brats who, had too much on their table and too many commercial gigs. And this, I guess what pushed this over for me, which tends to be what pushes me over often, is just, the sort of false coverage of Scottie. I think, it must be so confusing for him. It must be so confusing for him to be the type of person he is, to do the work that he's putting in, to be the type of teammate he is, to be as focused on basketball as he is and has been for so many years, and to have, this large segment of his, the city that he's in, that he's, considers his new home at just 21, to have them just openly dogging him, questioning his focus, questioning his work ethic, questioning all this stuff. Masai Ujiri, if you really listen to what he said, he didn't question his work ethic. He didn't say he didn't put in the work. They say more work has to be done. More work can always be done. But it wasn't a matter of that. They're twisting narratives to figure out, to tell the story that they want to tell. They want to tell the story of a guy who came into the season out of shape. I'm telling you that this is a story of a guy who had 2 ankle sprains in the span of a month and a half, who just couldn't get his season back on track. Okay? That's just the truth. It's truth. It's verified. It's true. You watched it happen. You saw him come up getting beat time and time again. When he was healthy, he was fine. But far be it for me to say, that the media is wrong, that Scottie was distracted at 21, right? He just had too many commercial obligations. That's it, right? What this is envy. It existed with Vince Carter when he was here as well. There was a lot of these people that I call the puckhead media that had issues with how much Vince was being given, how much money he was earning relative to hockey athletes at the time. They don't like players like this. They don't like guys like this. They like guys like Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, the guys who go through the G League and, they're underdog and all their complexes. They don't like a 21-year-old rookie of the year who's on 4 commercials. They don't like that. Something about them just, it rubs them the wrong way. Maybe it's envy. Maybe it's a feeling of they didn't earn it. Maybe it's closet racism. I have no idea. But I have watched it happen over and over again. And honestly, I've watched the same cycle happen with Vince. I'm not going to let it happen again here. So I'm just being straight up with you guys. I think Scottie's focused on basketball. I think he worked really hard last offseason. We can argue all day whether, he did as much as you would like him to, if he grew as much as you would like him to. Guess what? OG hasn't fixed his balance issues in 4 years. I don't hear us complaining that he hasn't, worked hard. There are a lot of players who came into this season worse players than they came in last year. Delano Banton shot 25% from 3 this year. He shot 26% in the G League from 3. Did he not work hard? Did he not work hard? Like, there's so many players who struggled. Fred VanVleet, his percentages were down from 3. His catch and shoot percentage, I think, was 35%. Did he not work hard? Does Fred VanVleet have work ethic issues? Problem is, you see a guy doing Twitch streams, you see a guy on commercials, you assume, well, if he's doing all of that, he's not training in basketball. There's a myth that players just train for 38 hours a week or something like that. It's just not possible. Okay, it's not possible. You can train 2-3 hours maximum in a day, maximum. After that, it's pointless because you're dead. If you're training the right way, you can't do it any more than that. You need off days. You need recovery. Okay? So I trust Scottie to do the work. I trust Scottie to care about basketball enough, care about his career enough. And I expect him to put a lot of people on notice this summer, and I expect him to put a lot of people on notice next year. I have not lost an ounce of faith in that dude. I hope in time that this media can learn to get their story straight about him. Stop misrepresenting what he did. Now, Bob McCowan, 12,000 subscribers. Now a whole bunch of people can be like, oh, he didn't even want to receive his Rookie of the Year trophy. I'm sorry, did y'all not watch Scottie receive his Rookie of the Year trophy in Toronto? He didn't need to go to the finals for it, but these two numbskulls, it's so irresponsible. But of course, you got a story to tell about this spoiled 21-year-old. You got to tell it, right? It's bullshit, man. It's such bullshit. These guys pick and choose who they want to protect every single time, and then they choose who they want to bury. It's just the fucking media in a nutshell, right? Look, just be fair. That's all I'm asking. Just be fair, okay? If Nick Nurse created a toxic work environment, if one of his lead assistants was, particularly prickly with his other assistants, if their offense didn't work, if they had fractured relationships and broken promises with players, and you know about it, stop sitting on it. Stop sitting on it. Stop calling it something else. Stop calling it something that it's not. Just report it. Just report it. Fuck your favors. Fuck your friends. Just report it. I think that's your responsibility as the media. I think your responsibility is to tell the truth. Anyway, have a good one, guys. Take care. Enjoy your day.